right, so everyone is a Bitcoiner? Or, all right, how many people here run a node? How many people feel like running one, but how many people that run a node know what it is? All right, so I'll talk about what it is and why you might run one. So the best way to talk about it really is Bitcoin is a protocol, and you have implementations of protocols, and you can have different versions of that, and it comes down to a question of what Bitcoin is and how you might interact with it. And the reason you run a node is because that's the only way to interact with it without using someone else running a node on your behalf. So my favorite way always to explain this has been like a language, like English. English is nothing but a set of rules and protocols that if you adopt them, it's useful because you know other people have those same rules and protocols too. And if you all agree on a certain standard that you can adopt, then you get something amazing like the ability to communicate. So if we all adopt the Bitcoin protocol, we get the benefit of having an economy that has agreed upon rules that no one can arbitrarily change. So the implementation is where the node comes in. And in language capacity, you're all English language nodes. You're all an implementation of that. If you think, I'm going to invent this thing called a language, and someone has to be able to, I need a thing that can carry this around and use it. Human beings are language implementations, but obviously software doesn't work like that. So Bitcoin itself has a node, which is the implementation of it. And there are competing implementations out there, but predominantly everyone uses what's known as Bitcoin Core, which is not doing so well lately. So that's why I brought this emoji along with me. I'll stick that there. And what you do with this is you direct permissionlessly with Bitcoin. That's what it allows you to do. So if you want to send a Bitcoin transaction, for example, you create it, you sign it with your private key, and then you use your node to tell the rest of the network about it. And all those nodes see what you've done. They see the transaction, they see that it's been signed, they verify that it was signed by someone that must have had the right private key, and then they go, that's a valid transaction, and then they broadcast it to all of their peers, and it spreads around the network like that. That's what Bitcoin nodes do. They also, when miners find a new block which contains all these transactions and cements them in history forever inside the blockchain, the miner sends that node out, sends that block out to the nodes it's connected to, and those nodes decide whether that's a valid block or not. And if it is, they tell all their peers about it. And ultimately, when you hear about all the electricity that miners consume solving blocks and how insanely high it is, that's because they have to meet this requirement placed on them by nodes that are saying, we want it to be really difficult for you to create new Bitcoins. So we're holding a stick up and saying, jump over this. And that's what nodes do to miners. And nodes are so important that miners meet that burden. We're currently telling them, the network difficulty is 130 trillion. What does that mean? It means you have to roll 130 trillion guesses at the SHA-256 algorithm before you're likely to find a block. And on average, that's how many it will take. So don't worry if that's a little bit confusing, but no one's going to jump through hoops like that unless they're satisfying something, a standard imposed upon them by a protocol that has been very widely adopted. And so a lot of less than half of you run nodes. And if you aren't running a node, you've never used Bitcoin before. Someone else used Bitcoin for you. It's the equivalent of if you went to Saudi Arabia and you don't speak Arabic and you went everywhere with a translator, and everything you wanted to say or communicate to anyone else, you had to turn around to your guy and be like, yeah, can you ask him how much? I could tell him I said thank you. Like, that's what you're doing in the Bitcoin world if you don't have a node. You're always asking someone else with a node to interact with the network for you. And that's not good, because if we become dependent on these translators for us, that's someone we have to trust. And Bitcoin is not supposed to be something where we trust third parties. That's what we're doing here. We don't want to trust banks. We don't want to trust politicians not to print too much money. We don't want to trust ledgers maintained by some sort of cartel that decide who can transact and who can't. None of that is appropriate, and that's what we're getting away from. So the fact that you can implement the protocol directly and run it on your own devices and interact with random peers around the network and not go through middlemen, that's what keeps Bitcoin decentralized, and that's what makes it worth using. So I thought I would just fire one up and show you how sort of trivial it is to do it. This is just basic. If you flash Linux onto any machine you might have, so Debian is well known, Ubuntu is like more user friendly and even more well known version of Debian. And anyone run Linux before? I should say that you can run nodes on Windows, you can run nodes on Mac as well. Ideally, you could run them on your phone too. I think you have to hack around a bit to do that, but Linux is a nice thing to use for demonstrations, but don't be so concerned about it. So I'm just going to fire it up now, and I'm going to compile it from source as well, because it's really not so scary. So this is my home directory in this new Bitcoin Valley user I created for this demonstration. And this is just a brand new box, a brand new Linux box that I'm connected to back home. So first off, I'll start by just cloning the repository where the source code lives for the implementation I'm going to use, which is called Bitcoin Knots. So it's on this website, github.com. Bitcoin Knots is, I guess, the organization, and then Bitcoin is the repo. So it's just going to clone that now. It's pulling in the source code for the Bitcoin Knots implementation. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of sitting around watching stuff like this while I do this, but yeah, any questions while that does that? Anyone?
Most people would want to do it, I think, on Windows, because Linux as an operating system is something I know it's better to do it there, but most people aren't familiar.
Yeah, so like Rory there pointed out, most people are going to be using Windows for this because most people use Windows. And that's true, but you just download it, go online, go to bitcoinknots.org and download the Windows Bitcoin Knots client, and then you just double click on it, run it like any other application. I don't need to be doing it in this silly advanced way, I guess, but I don't want to use Windows either. Goes down to that, really. So there we go, I have it now, and if I look in this folder, I have this thing called Bitcoin now. That is a folder that contains the source code with which I can build it. So importantly, all this is open source, right? Everyone familiar with the concept of open source, right? We don't trust it. We look at the source code and we use that to build the applications that we run, because we don't want to trust those things, because that would be no good, right? So I'm going to start by installing the dependencies, because I need those. So I can't just compile source code without having the necessary dependencies. So here we go. I'm just going to install all this stuff, confirm it, yes, and watch it do that. Oops, I need to. Let's see if that works this time. All right, yeah. So it's just going to install all the dependencies. I need those. But yeah, Windows is a good thing if you're like, I should explain the Windows thing. Like, the binaries are there for that. You can build it from source code yourself in Windows if you want, but it's usually annoying to do that. You'll end up installing WSL, which is just this again, but inside Windows. So, yeah. Any other questions while we watch this thing happen?
Is there any difference on any of the platforms, say Mac or Windows or Linux?
No, they should all. Is there any difference between running it on different OSs? Not really. It's the OS that's different. The software should be the same and operate the same on all of them.
There hasn't been any issues in your experience between any of the systems?
No, I mean, there hasn't been any issues. No, I've been running it. I've run Bitcoin nodes on pretty much anything. Usually it's on Linux, but I ran it on Mac for like years, and just like, that's another point. Like, why would you want to run a node? If you have a Bitcoin wallet, you want to attach it to your node. That's like a given, right? And that you need. So I had a node running on my Mac laptop for years, and then if you install like Sparrow Wallet, or Electrum, or whatever, that points to your Bitcoin node, usually through an Electrum server, which itself sits between the node and the wallet. But I'm not going to get into that. So we have the dependencies installed now. So we're going to change, that's what CD means, change directory into that Bitcoin directory there. And then I can type ls, and you just see these, this is the source code for Bitcoin. That's what it looks like. And then we run this autogen shell script, and that sort of sets it up. I don't really understand what that does, if I'm honest, but there you go. It will do that, and then we're going to configure. That's the second step. I'm going to just make it do stuff that's going to make it compile a lot faster. So bear with me when I do that. Has anyone ever done this before? Anyone here compiled Bitcoin before? Yeah? Nice. Jono has, at the record show, Jono has compiled Bitcoin. Alright, so we compiled it. We set it up, and now we just type this make command. I think I have like 6 processors on here, 6 CPUs or 6 threads. So that's it. It's now compiling the node. That's all it does. And then once that's finished compiling, I can just type Bitcoin D, and that will be it. It will be running Bitcoin. That's it. And I will be having a node running on here. We'll see the logs because it will tell you we're synchronizing up with the blockchain, and it will start at block 0 and verify every block all the way up to the tip of the chain that's happening right now. And that's how you know that if someone sends you Bitcoin, you don't need to trust that they really had the Bitcoin because you verified it yourself, because a miner put the transaction where they sent you money inside a block, and that block was built on top of the block before it, which was valid, which was built on top of the block before it, right? It's a chain of blocks, and it goes all the way back to the first block Satoshi mined, and you can verify that the entire financial history of this network is truthful, and that everyone that says they have Bitcoins does have Bitcoins. This is how you verify that without a trusted third party. If you want to run a Lightning node, that will sit on top of your Bitcoin node. If you want to run your own instance of mempool, mempool space that is, that will sit on top of your Bitcoin node. If you want to run join market, stuff like that, that will sit on top of your Bitcoin node. Anything, the node doesn't do much by itself. Usually you want to install other things that sit on top of it, like Lightning nodes and other things, so that you can actually use it. Most common thing we're using is wallets, right? You have a Bitcoin wallet. If your wallet is not reaching out to your node, it's just reaching out to someone else's, and you're trusting them, which, to be fair, usually is okay, but it's not kosher. We don't like doing things that way, and we don't encourage people to do things that way, because typically there'll be one giant person that does that on everyone's behalf, and they become the equivalent of what you get in other protocols like email, where everyone uses SMTP every day, but they do it through Google. Google just runs that on everyone's behalf. And then you have Microsoft doing it as well, and a couple of others. You want to run the whole thing yourself, and you want to verify that you're doing it yourself, right? So connecting your own wallet to your own node means collectively we all get the benefit that no one tries to scam anyone else in Bitcoin, because there's no point. People are too busy verifying everything that goes on all the time. And that being the case, that just means if there's fake transactions out there, people are going to know very quickly, so you don't even attempt it, right? And this is in contrast with all the crypto projects out there, where doing this would take me probably a month of figuring out how to do it, and I wouldn't be able to do it on a low power machine back in my house, just connected to it over a VPN. Someone did do an experiment where they tried to run an Ethereum node, and I think it did take them a whole month to sync up to the tip of the network, and it was just, it's not designed for that. Bitcoin is designed for anyone to be able to run it. A lot of people here run nodes. If you go to like some ETH conference or something like that, you say who runs a node, I would bet probably 40 or 50% of the people there didn't even know what that was, let alone run one. So yeah, super important. And I guess, well, I'll throw it over to you again while this compiles, because it will take a while. So, any other questions for now?
So what's the, like, we're doing Bitcoin knots here. And so without getting into like everything going on, like what's the difference between like core and knots? Like, is that somebody's like variation of core? Or
Yeah,
like, are there other variations of core? Because like I've never really heard about it until all this knot stuff came about.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just I'll get to that in a second.
Sure.
So in SRC, it just compiled it. So I'm just gonna type /, that means like in this directory, run this binary. This is it. This is now a Bitcoin node running. That's what a Bitcoin node looks like. This is Bitcoin. So it's just syncing up to the chain. it's going to race all the way up to block 920,000 or whatever we're at the moment. And it's just going to verify that everything that's happened since Satoshi mined the first block was true, and then every block after it, it's going to verify that that correctly links to the one before it. That is Bitcoin. That is what it looks like. So yeah, so your question was, we're talking about knots versus core and things like that. Anyone can implement Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin core is the implementation everyone knows about. Bitcoin knots is a modification and a bunch of patches and variations on top of what core has done. So it's not a ground up re-implementation. Okay. There are other people that have totally re-implemented Bitcoin from scratch in like a different programming language. You have that as well. They're run by incredibly few people. Basically, everyone uses Bitcoin Core, right. And more recently, everyone's using a modified version of Bitcoin Core called Knots, right. Which back in May was at 1% and now is at about 18.5% or 13%, depending on whether you're looking at just listening nodes or like. It's kind of this is not a network with official stats, so right. No one really knows how many of each there are, but yeah. So the difference really is, a lot of people think. I primarily think Core is doing very bad things to Bitcoin at the moment, and Knots is trying to push in the opposite direction. It's basically the contention is about how much arbitrary data do we want to bless and solicit. That's basically the entire spam war.
Yeah, I listened to your talk the other day, just walking around. So are you syncing your node right now? Is that so? Like on my computer, this took 2 weeks.
Sure. So the question is about how long does it take to sync a node? Yeah. I'm just repeating it for people listening. Mm-hmm. So it depends on a few things. First, internet. How fast is your internet? It's almost a terabyte of data at this point, so it's a lot to download. Second is disk I/O. If you have like an old hard drive rather than a solid state drive, it takes forever because it's got to read and write so much. Another factor is RAM. If you can cache everything in RAM, all of the UTXO set while you're syncing, then that's a lot faster than if you have to keep writing the UTXO set to disk and then drawing from that every time you have to verify a block that contains something within that folder. And then you have peer luck as well. Like you might just connect to peers with really bad internet who take a long time to send you each block. There's a whole bunch of factors.
And are the peers selected? Like, how are the peers selected? Is it random,
there's a bunch of heuristics for that. Okay. Like, there's some interesting stuff they do. Like, nodes will automatically try not to connect to too many IPs belonging to like the same ISP in the same region, just to try and give it, to not fall under any sort of jurisdiction that's trying to do anything funny. So that's a fun one. I don't know exactly how that protocol works for it just reaching out and saying, hi, I'll connect to you and you and you, because again, there's no like official list there. I don't really know how that works, but typically your node, that's a point though, typically your node won't be a listening node, which a listening node is one that other people can connect to. And instead your node will reach out to others in an outbound capacity. So this node right now, I can probably Control-C it, then background it. I didn't want to do that. Okay, it's going to be annoying about it. So, yeah, I don't know. When I Control-Z stuff in Linux, bad things happen, and I don't know how to sort it out. So forget that. But you can write bitcoin-CLI and then get peer info, and it will tell you everything about who you're connected to. Okay. And this one will have, I think it's 1 inbound connection and 10 outbound connections, and that's default. If I opened a port in my router, then I'd get other people start reaching out and connecting to me, and then that's fun. That's like being a better citizen of the network generally.
Is there an incentive to do that, other than just like feeling good about it?
The question is there incentives? Yeah, so I do it. I have a listening node that's got usually around 140 inbound peers. I think it would have, I allow like 1,000, and I think that's those nodes cleverly. I think I have a lot of neighbors running Bitcoin nodes, basically, because if I didn't, I think I would have more incoming connections. I do it because I want to help. I have like, the internet's really good here. I have like a gigabit upload. Sure. So I'm like, great, I'm going to use that and help people bootstrap new nodes really quickly. It just takes a long time. So it's almost done syncing the block headers. Once it reaches 900, and there you go. These are all the oldest blocks in Bitcoin, right? From back in 2009, you're watching blocks get verified. It's going to fly through the first 100,000 blocks real quick. And then, it slows down and it gets slower and slower and slower, basically. And then, yeah. So
The height number is the block.
yeah. So yeah, the height it's running pretty slowly, to be fair. So I might have some pretty bad peers, just having been unlucky with that. Usually it would have been 100,000 by now. So I don't know. I got some dodgy peers this time. That's the peer loss. What's that?
Since you're connected to my Starlink.
Yeah. Well, Starlinks aren't that bad actually. They're all right. Yeah. So any other questions about it? Like, what does anyone feel like running a node because they've watched this? Right. Yeah. So, question. I'll go that way. Oh, sorry. I thought that was a question.
I think
No,
you
no,
talked about it,
I'd
but
be interested.
if somebody wants to get started, they have nothing and hardware options. What hardware options for people?
Like a hardware to run a node on?
Yeah.
I mean, you can run it on like an old PC. Like we did fight a war to make it. So the question is about what hardware to use to run a node. You can run it on an old PC. It will take a long time to sync up right now. If it's only got like 4 gigabytes of RAM or something, it's like really old. It will probably take over a month, which is a shame. But we did our best. The whole block size war was literally about making it cheap and easy for people to run nodes, because that's been such an important thing to prioritize. There you go. We sped up now. We're flying through. So hardware options, like if you want to run one cheaply, you can. I guess you can. I would just buy like a Minis Forum, like mini PC, something like that you can stick next to your router, and probably cost you like $400 or something like that. You can do it on a Raspberry Pi if you really want, but they end up costing like $300 once you get all the little bits and pieces for them. So it's like just buy something like 8 times more powerful for a little bit more money, and you can run it on a like powerful server as well if you want, but you don't need to. That's definitely.
We're mentioning Start9.
Start9's good. Start9's a good operating system for this stuff, right?
Explain what it is.
Yeah, so Start9 is, disclaimer, I used to work there. Start9 is a company that makes like a plug and play version of Linux that you can flash onto a computer, and then when you load it up, there's no command line. It's a nice, friendly interface, and you can use that to, you can click on Bitcoin, like there's a button there that says Bitcoin. You click on it, and then you press install, and it will do all of this. There's no compiling or anything like that. And then it also conveniently has all these other Bitcoin related apps like Lightning nodes and mempool self-hosts and Sparrow wallet server and Electrum servers and all that stuff that you actually want to have a Bitcoin node to use. All that is like one-click install, and it all auto-configurates itself to be able to work with the Bitcoin node. So definitely Start9 is a great option. They're my favorite, of course, and there are other options out there too, like Umbrel, which I find to not be as good, but they have a lot more apps, but it's a bit less reliable as a machine. So, any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
When you have your node on a piece of hardware, do you typically SSH into it from a separate device?
Question is how you access the node. So usually that's how I use it. I never use the graphical interface for my Bitcoin nodes, because it's just, I'm always testing stuff, and when you're testing stuff, it's always command line. That's just kind of how it works. But if you're running a node on your laptop, then it's just there like any other app, like a browser.
Does it use very much RAM if you have it on your laptop?
You can configure how much RAM it would use. So you can set the DB cache. Typically, like, you might want to set that quite high when you're syncing, just so you can fly through IBD, which means initial block download, not irritable bowel disease. That term has been repurposed for Bitcoin. So yeah, you might want to configure the RAM up high, just so it gets through it quicker, because it takes a lot longer. If it can keep the UTXO set in RAM, then it just gets through verifying the chain faster. If it has to keep writing the UTXO set, flushing it to disk, then disk IO is a lot slower than RAM. So it just slows stuff down. But if you've got like an NVMe drive inside your laptop, which most do, it will be really quick, even if you're not
And then do you need a separate storage for syncing like because it's like what, 500 gigabytes at this point?
Yeah, so, well, it's more than that. So the question is about storage for the blockchain. The blockchain's huge, right? It's almost a terabyte. It's like 600 gigabytes, 700 gigabytes at the moment. You can prune it if you want, and that's fine to do. It will mean that some wallet software doesn't work. Anything that needs Electrum servers won't work, but you can mine with it. And interestingly, a lot of the biggest miners out there run prune nodes rather than archival because they have so much redundancy. They'll run like 20 clusters of nodes so that if one of them goes offline, it doesn't matter. They have all this redundancy, right? They have no need to store repeat versions of the blockchain, 700 gigabyte after 700 gigabyte after. They just prune everything down to like, 550 megabytes is the smallest you can prune. But then you still have the UTXO set of 12.
I'd love to just have it available on my computer, but if I need 700 gigs to always
Well,
get today.
prune it. If you want to have it on your computer, you can absolutely do that. Just prune it so that you'll be using about 18 gigabytes of space if you have it on your laptop and you prune it.
That's what I did on my laptop.
What's
My
that?
work laptop, I did a prune node, just because I was trying to learn how it all worked.
Uh-huh.
And then on my main computer, I bought a 2 terabyte hard drive and just put it on my main computer as well when I was trying to learn. And then I got a mini score computer.
Nice. Yeah. So you can also you can plug in an external drive. I did this for years. It was really annoying, but you can just plug in a drive whenever you want to use Bitcoin. And you tell in the config file for this and in the GUI, you can say, what do you want the data directory to be? And you could point that to the external drive, right? Just like if you're downloading something in a browser, and it asks you where you want to store it, you can open up the file explorer and tell it, I want to store it in this external drive. You can do that with the Bitcoin application too. Say, I want to store the blockchain in this external drive. All that will happen is, though, one day you'll forget to plug that in before you open Bitcoin and it will complain to you. That's all. And that's annoying. I always have laptops with really big internal drives. There's a sort of superstition at this point because I've been running Bitcoin nodes on my laptop for so long, but I don't do it now. I run it inside its own dedicated server, but I didn't start doing that until like pretty much this year.
I want to go off of his question too, where he's like, what's the incentive? I get that it's nice to be a good citizen of the network and decentralize the network and everything, but like, what do you find as a person running a node yourself that incentivizes you to keep doing it?
Well, I don't want to ask permission. Right? The question is about incentives to run a node. And here's the red pill on this, which is like the uncomfortable truth, is that there isn't really that much incentive to run a node. And because you don't get paid to do it. Miners get paid to do what they do. Like miners prevent people reorging the blockchain. They say, if you want to reorg the blockchain, we've ratcheted up the difficulty to this insanely high number that you can't use your laptop to double spend Bitcoin transactions anymore. Because if you want to remine the last 10 blocks, you're not going to be able to do it. You need millions of dollars worth of hardware. And if you have millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin hardware, you're going to use it to mine real blocks that aren't attacking the network so that you can make money. That whole incentive thing's quite well understood for Bitcoin mining. But for Bitcoin nodes, we don't get paid. It's always this kind of appeal to, like, I went over the sort of dogma already, where I'm like, if you don't run a node and you use someone else's node with your wallets, they might lie to you and tell you that you have Bitcoins you don't really have, or something like that. But in reality, it basically never happens. The sad truth about Bitcoin is you can get by without running a node. But we need people to run nodes, otherwise there's no network. The network is people doing this, connecting to each other, and all of the billions and billions of dollars of mining out there is just them jumping through hoops imposed on them by us doing this. So if there's only 10 of us doing this, miners aren't going to be interested in satisfying that requirement anymore, because it's no longer a credible thing that they must do, because it's the rules can be arbitrarily changed. Again, back to the English language thing. The only reason it's worth learning English is because there's a billion other people that know it. And the only reason it's worth learning all this kind of stuff and mining at the difficulty there is because of the amount of people that run nodes. But the incentives are difficult. There's no lie there, because
yeah, the Lightning Network also sync, or your own Lightning Network node. Because I mean, there's a few more like business applications. I get the impression, like pay server
Yeah, so if you want to run BTC Pay Server or a Lightning node and all that, it has to. There are ways around it, but you basically have to sit on top of your own Bitcoin node or someone's Bitcoin node. You can run Lightning clients or things like LND and CLN on top of. Well, you could just run them with things that make it reach out to other people's nodes instead of your own. Like you have Neutrino for LND and you have Fulgor or something for Core Lightning. If that probably broken knowing Core Lightning, but like you can do stuff like that. That is why like I run a node. It's fun. Like I have my own Lightning node. I have my own Lightning channels, and it all like when I close a Lightning channel, it's negotiating with the counterparty to create a transaction that closes our channel, and that gets broadcast by my node to the network, right? I'm not asking permission, any of that stuff. I like using it that way. The incentive is, it's fun, pretty much. Like, it should be more than that. Collectively, the fact that there's loads of us doing that is what makes Bitcoin secure and resilient and why it's just not another crypto. But, telling people they've got to do it, I do struggle coming up with rationalizations for why people have to do it, because they're like, there's plenty of people in this room that presumably own Bitcoin that don't run a node, and they're happy with it. And I have to go and like invent problems and say, you have to do this thing. No, you're doing it wrong. And it's unfortunate, but it's just the
If you
reality.
have enough channels and a large enough volume in your channels, then you can make money on fees. Like,
Not for Lightning. So the point was you can be a routing node in the Lightning network and make money. So first off, you can run a Lightning node without running a Bitcoin node. You can do that. And second off, no one's making any money running Lightning routing nodes. No, it sucks. Like you make more money being a coordinator in a what do you call it? Joint market.
Oh,
yeah. You can make more money doing that if that's what you feel like getting some sort of, what do they call it? Yield. If you want to generate yield, if you want to get some yield on your Bitcoin, be a coin joint coordinator.
Is there privacy reasons to run your own node?
Yeah, so you can get around it. The question was about privacy. I think there are some incentives there. Like the Dandelion never happened, which was this concept where you could make it your own transaction and broadcast it out of your node, but it would like go through a few hops, a random number of hops, before revealing that it was a transaction, and then no one would know where that transaction came from. Because in theory, there could be malicious nodes out there, and you can connect to them, and you broadcast your transaction to them, and they log the IP. They're like, all right, so this guy spent that UTXO, and then they can connect it with an IP, right? And try and unstitch the pseudonymousness of Bitcoin. Like, so running a node in like that's kind of less private than if you went on like BlockStream's transaction push service that you can connect to via Tor and just upload your transaction into that and broadcast it that way. That's probably more private, to be honest. Or, well, it's not private, it's anonymous. I think that's presumably what you're
I
getting.
think there are various like Lightning native Bitcoin companies out there where they then have their own nodes to make sure they're routing their own like transactions for verification of transactions and so forth. But you can still probably just use someone else's Lightning node if you're going to spin up a Lightning company.
Yeah, I don't know how the question is about like Lightning infrastructure and stuff. Those guys do what they're gonna do. It's its own ecosystem. It's super custodial for the most part. Like people like Voltage and what they called Zaprite, companies like that run Lightning stuff for third parties. They're gonna be running their own infrastructure. They'll have their own nodes. So that's the thing. But I'm talking about home node runners here, people that run Bitcoin nodes in their house to connect their own Bitcoin applications to. Like if you have a wallet on your phone, it's ideal if that wallet is connected to your own Bitcoin node. That is the correct way to do it. And the thing is, conceptually, when Bitcoin was designed, that's all you could do. The only Bitcoin software that existed when Satoshi released it was just called Bitcoin. It was just an application, a Windows application called Bitcoin. There were no third-party applications. There were no middlemen. They didn't exist yet. So the only way to store Bitcoin was in your Bitcoin node. There were no hardware wallets. There was no Electrum servers, no nothing. And 100% of Bitcoiners were running nodes. And it was a completely, perfectly decentralized network, apart from, Satoshi controlled basically the entire code base. But that's only gotten worse and worse and worse since then, because now most Bitcoiners don't run nodes because they don't have to, because there's all these middleman apps that allow them to use Bitcoin, but with some third party the minute there's someone between you and the Bitcoin network, you need that person's permission. And if that person provides a really useful service that everyone wants to use, then they just become the Google of Bitcoin. And this is the eternal dystopian fear of every Bitcoiner, that happens. And the way you stop that happening is by somewhat altruistically running a node and refusing to use a third party. So I'm not going to lie, if you don't use a node, your Bitcoin experience is usually fine. But the network can't last if everyone has that attitude. So I don't know. Someone has to do it. And of course I do it. So yeah, any other questions or?
Yeah, what's about the listening nodes?
Listening nodes.
Yeah. So
Listening node means I can allow other people to make inbound connections to me. So they are outbound and they are inbound to me.
yeah.
So that allows other people trying to bootstrap themselves up with a new node. You run on Start 9, right?
yeah.
So that's automatically a listening node, but only over Tor, which sucks because it's
Gives you-
really slow.
One maybe.
What's that?
It gives you one
No,
outbound connection.
if you go into your Start 9 interface and you look at your Bitcoin node and
Yeah.
like there'll be something in the properties that says like network info or something, and it will. I bet you have like 4 inbound connections or
It's
something.
usually at one when I look.
Well,
What's that?
do you have Tor disabled?
I'm not sure.
It might be that. I don't know. Like that's I don't. Who knows why these things happen? If you have really poor connectivity, how's your internet? Is it good? Or
Starlink.
is it? Starlink's quite good though, isn't it?
It's pretty good. It's not as good as wired Hellas or
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've never used Starlink. As far as I know, it's all right. I know it's annoying, like on the lowest tier, that you can't port forward and like assign static IPs and stuff. That starts to get really annoying. But like being a listening node over IPv4 is great, but you have to usually forward a port in any home internet connection setup because people can't, by design, people on the wider internet can't reach into your home network and start connecting to services you have running on your laptop and stuff. That's not a thing unless you specifically start forwarding ports to services and stuff like that.
I see.
And that's kind of like reasonable. Otherwise, we would just not be able to use anything without getting compromised all the time.
And a VPN has nothing to do with that either. You're running one.
A VPN is, that's not really relevant to generally what we're getting at here. So yeah, anyone else got something?
You mentioned in the beginning how it was just Bitcoin, like a basic Bitcoin wallet.
Yeah.
If you started there, would that software be updated for managing your Bitcoin and your node and everything at this point?
Yeah, that's what this is. So the software Satoshi released was just called Bitcoin. There was no Bitcoin Core yet. It was just Bitcoin. And I guess the thing you double click on will be called Bitcoin QT. I don't know if that showed up right away or later. It was a Windows only application. You couldn't run it anywhere else. And, after a few years, we started separate, like you could mine inside that. It was a wallet. It was everything you could do. I think it even had like messaging and gambling and stuff like that. They were all like, Satoshi was like, it can do this and that, like social network or something. He didn't do that, but it did everything. And slowly but surely features got ripped out of it and it changed its name. So mining is not a part of this anymore. If you want to mine Bitcoin and you try and point a Bitcoin miner to your Bitcoin node, they have no idea how to talk to each other because miners don't speak the Bitcoin protocol and they speak Stratum, and Bitcoin nodes don't speak Stratum. They speak Bitcoin. So you need something that sits on top of your node called the Stratum server for your Bitcoin miner to be able to have work generated for it. And when it finds a block, the Stratum server tells the Bitcoin node, hi, we finally found a block, and then the Bitcoin node tells the wider network.
Wow.
So, and also like wallets, the only wallet software was your Bitcoin node, and now that's not a thing. There is a wallet inside this, but it's no one really uses it. Most people use another wallet that they connect to their Bitcoin node because it's just friendlier. Like Sparrow is like a really popular wallet at this point, and you can connect that to your Bitcoin node directly, but it doesn't work great. typically what you do is you run an Electrum server, which adds an additional degree of indexing to what a Bitcoin node does. It adds like 60 gigabytes of additional info about what's in blocks just so it can perform lookups faster. So if I receive some Bitcoin in my wallet that's connected to an Electrum server rather than my Bitcoin node, it will be able to pick up quicker that, hey, that's one of your addresses. Or
What's an
something.
Electrum server?
What's that?
What's an Electrum server?
Yeah, so an Electrum server is, Bitcoin doesn't do a lot of indexing by default. So it downloads the blockchain, but it doesn't index it all that much. So that makes lookups slower. Like you have different databases are optimized in different ways, right? Bitcoin nodes, everything in here is stored in something called level DB, which if I'm not mistaken is a custom database that's only used by Bitcoin. Electrum sits on top of your Bitcoin node, queries it for all of the data in the blockchain and indexes it in a more readily available way. Just so stuff is right there. Like I don't know exactly what it does and the different tiers you can have of how much you want stuff indexed. Like Mempool Spaces backend, they run a modified Electrum server that has 2 terabytes of just stuff to make stuff really quick. Because I can look up like a Bitcoin address, I can query it inside a Bitcoin node, I believe, and it will take like multiple seconds to be like, okay, we found it. Whereas if you're using Electrum servers to do that, it will basically spit it out at you immediately. And that's what you want your wallet to do. When your wallet, like, so if I like buy a Trezor or something, all right, if I use a Trezor for a while and a bunch of the addresses in that have some Bitcoin sent to them, and then I switch setup or whatever, and I upload my XPub into the new wallet or my new laptop, if it's got Electrum running underneath it, it can very quickly scan the whole chain and go, yeah, you have this much Bitcoin sitting there, that much Bitcoin sitting there. A Bitcoin node takes way longer to do that because it has to rescan the whole chain from the beginning. So an Electrum server can do in like, basically in under 1 second, what a Bitcoin node would take to do address lookups and all that stuff for balances.
Is that because of the code that it's written?
No, it just performs extra indexing. It's nothing to do with the there are multiple Electrum servers. There's ElectRS, which is written in Rust. There's others that I forget, but the ElectRS is the one pretty much everyone uses, I think. So yeah, so it's just the additional indexing it does. Like it doesn't need to look up multiple things and then put them together in the same way everything's in one table, I guess, or something like one row. I'm no SQL master, so I don't know. Anyway, yeah. Next, any questions?
Is it worth touching on why people should run knots?
Yeah, so why should people run knots? So this is important. A lot of people have never run a lot of people have just never run a server in their house. So for the people that put their hands up when you run a Bitcoin node, that said yes, had you ever run a server in your house before you did that?
You know, cloud server.
Maybe that counts. I'll pretend it doesn't, just because it makes me point better. So basically, that confirms what I've said. It's anecdotal, of course, but we know this to be true. A lot of people that run a Bitcoin node have never run a server in their house before. A Bitcoin node is something that is it's connecting to an unregulated peer-to-peer network that anyone can connect to you and you can connect to anyone, right? They can dump random files on your computer as a result of that. Now that is as dangerous as it sounds. You don't want that to be the case. In Bitcoin, typically, what your node will do is it has a mempool which contains all these unconfirmed transactions. What your Bitcoin node will typically do is it has a bunch of policies that says, I'm not going to accept certain stuff. Even though it could make it into the chain, ultimately, because it's a valid transaction, I don't want that in my mempool for whatever reason. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. Some of them are not remotely controversial. Some of them are extremely controversial. But it's been the norm since Satoshi was around that people running Bitcoin nodes would discriminate against people trying to store arbitrary data inside Bitcoin. So people that are trying to dump video files or JPEGs and stuff like that into your node, you would typically try and discern that by running a bunch of filters and reject them. So what you want is genuine Bitcoin transactions in your node that you forward on to other nodes, and then miners pick them up, and then miners put them in the blockchain, and then you download their blocks, and they're all confirmed, and you the minute you get a block confirmed full of transactions, you dump them from your mempool because they're now in the blockchain. But it is as weird as it sounds, right? You're running a server in your house that, oh, this space is too low because I didn't prune it. So anyway, that's one. That's a node failing to sync to the network. So anyway, yeah. So the reason people are running knots is because the long-standing tradition of basically having a remotely cautious attitude about standing up a server in your house that anyone can dump files onto. There's all these filters that protect you somewhat from people doing silly things. You have this thing called data carrier size, which is, you know, or op return, which allows people to stash. It allows them in a relatively friendly way to the network to store things that aren't Bitcoin, but to just write messages or store hashes inside the blockchain, right? That's what op return was for. And by default, mempool policy, Knots and Core both said we're not allowing many people to we're not allowing people to store a lot of this. Was different. And that's been 40 and 80 bytes forever, basically. And suddenly, with the last release of Core, or the upcoming release of Core, it's going to be 100,000 bytes. So it's gone from 80 to 100,000. And that's where you cross the threshold, because basically, to clarify and summarize all this as simply as I can, it's not a simple topic, but so the basic summary is I'm running a server in my house that anyone could connect to and dump random files onto that should be Bitcoin transactions. And the ones that aren't Bitcoin transactions, I've been discarding because they tend to contain arbitrary data, which tends to be pretty tasteless pictures, usually scams people are running on top of Bitcoin, sometimes pornography, sometimes stuff like that. We've been rejecting it pretty aggressively. But the change in Core was essentially this server in your house by default will accept 100 kilobyte files, which is enough to do to start getting people in trouble. Because I allow 40 bytes of op return on my node at home because no one can really do anything with 40 bytes that's going to have law enforcement knocking on my door. Whereas 100,000 bytes, that's enough to store ransomware, malware, pornography, you know, illegal pornography, and I won't go into detail what I mean on that. Suddenly it's like basically Bitcoin Core have said to the world, you're running a server at home, do it without any sort of precautions taken whatsoever. This is fine because everything ultimately has to be wrapped up to look like a valid Bitcoin transaction, and there's no way to abuse that. The minute something's enveloped as a valid Bitcoin transaction, the data is just ones and zeros at that point, and no one can ever come knocking on your door. This is just wrong and naive. Like,
can you explain quickly what the mempool is for people that don't understand?
Yeah.
And the difference between how Bitcoin Core 30 is going to use the mempool and how Knots is going to use it.
So the question is, what is a mempool and what's the difference in Core and Knots? So your mempool it's the bit before anything would go in the blockchain. Your mempool, everyone that runs a node pretty much has a mempool. You can run it without a mempool if you want, but let's ignore that. You have a mempool. If I make a transaction in Bitcoin and I broadcast it out of my node, all of the nodes I'm connected to take that unconfirmed transaction and stick it in their mempool. They download it from me. They verify whether it's a valid Bitcoin transaction or not. If it wasn't, they drop it. If it was, then they store it in their mempool and they relay it onto their peers with the same set of rules. They might discard it for whatever reason. Maybe their mempool is full and they don't want it, or maybe it contains an op return of 90 bytes and that violates their policy, so they drop it or whatever. But they relay it, they forward it on to a bunch of to all their peers. And it stays in your mempool until you discard it for whatever reason. Maybe it gets too old. Maybe it didn't pay a high enough transaction fee to get in the blockchain in time, and it eventually ends up, typically in normal circumstances, a miner picks it up, puts it in a block, and then when you receive that block, you drop it out of your mempool because it's no longer an unconfirmed transaction. It's now in the blockchain, and that's there till the end of time, essentially. So, the way Knots and Core differ is Core are trying to say, let's look at what miners are putting in the blockchain, and let's get rid of everyone's mempool filters as appropriate to try and make our mempool look as similar to the next block as possible, which is this sort of There's no reason for doing that, actually, and I don't know why they have this strange fetish for thinking that somehow makes things nice. It's sort of it's like little more than an aesthetic decision with some weak technical rationalizations for it. Knots, on the other hand, says don't attack Bitcoin by accepting malicious junk, whether it's transactions deliberately designed to bloat the UTXO set or whether it's pornography or whatever. Reject it on a best effort basis. Some of it might end up in the blockchain anyway. That happens, but still, if you run a node, you are a citizen of planet Bitcoin, and you don't want to actively trash it. So your mempool policies should probably reflect that. So if people are trying to create some scam coin on top of Bitcoin that needs op return to anchor itself in every week, it does some transaction or something like that to anchor itself. You don't need to participate in that if you don't want to, and you're not undermining Bitcoin's censorship resistance if you don't, because that's not what mempool filters do. Bitcoin is censorship resistant, but that is not by virtue of you having to accept everything sent at you and store it on your computer, because you would be crazy to do that because people control you and get you in a lot of trouble. You're running a server in your house, and that requires some responsibility, especially if you're connecting to a network like Bitcoin. You're not connecting to Facebook, right? Where if you receive some dodgy image, it's Mark Zuckerberg's problem. Like, that's not how it works. It's your problem. Everything that ends up on your node is your responsibility. So if you want the benefit, if you want the freedom of Bitcoin, take the responsibility of being a decent citizen of the network. Otherwise, if we can't handle that, we know what happens. We upset the planet, and the planet demands regulation, and then we have to acquiesce to it. That's just the rule of life. If you want freedom, you have to be responsible. That's pretty hard for people to handle.
Do you have to set up the op return, the amount in op return for knots, or is there a default?
So the knots, the question is, do you have to set these policies generally, right? So everything has a default value, right? When you fire it up, it isn't going to say, what do you want this to be, and refuse to start until you give it a value. It just gives you a sensible default. So knots obviously has a really sensible default. The data carrier size, which is how big of an op return will I allow in my mempool and relay to my peers, knots is set to 43 bytes, which means people can upload 40 bytes of data in op return. And 42 bytes, not 43. And the 2 bytes themselves are just the beginning of the transaction that says I'm an op return. Here's an unspendable output data. And the default in core at the moment still is 83, which is exactly twice the size. So 40 in knots plus 2 bytes of declaration, essentially, or 80 bytes in core, which is 83 because the additional byte in that sense is declaring the second half of it or something. I don't know how that works.
What will it be in core 30?
In core 30, it will be 100,000, which is over an 1,000x increase, which is as reckless as it sounds. It's literally just drunk driving, and I cannot mince words on it anymore. It's ridiculous. So because 80 bytes, you can't do anything with that. You cannot store pornography in 80 bytes of data. You just can't do it. You can in 100,000 bytes. And this is not a file sharing network. It's a monetary network. Cannot emphasize that. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
Could you speak to, like, if I was running core now, which I assume is version 29?
Yep.
Like, what are the pros and cons of just not upgrading to version 30? Or if I wanted to go run my own node, but I didn't want to run knots and run core, could I just go run version 29 of core and not choose to run 30? Or even 28 or 27 or whatever.
The question is, can I just run older versions of core if I don't like the new version of core? It's not a sustainable approach because there are vulnerabilities in old versions of software that get fixed. So if backports happen, that's okay, but they don't. So they've backported some of the stuff that's getting merged from core 30 into core 29. That happens, but generally, in principle, you don't want to be running 5-year-old versions of Bitcoin nodes because they're full of vulnerabilities. Like, it's just, that gets updated every release. They can do something you don't like and change a feature in Bitcoin Core whilst fixing a bunch of vulnerabilities, and you still want them. So really, you have to maintain, if you really just want to use core and carry on with the good stuff they're doing, but not have the bad stuff, you have to maintain your own fork of it with a patch set that you like, and that is what Knots is. Like I said originally, Knots is not a re-implementation, it's just core trying to say, well, I don't like this and I do like that, cherry picking. And in this case, the main difference now is mempool policy.
So can you go to the Knots website or whatever and
Yeah.
see sort of what they're choosing to include?
It's on GitHub, so that got cloned, right?
Okay.
It was just, I cloned it, github.com/bitcoinknots/bitcoin. It's also just, if you just want to download the binary, you just go to bitcoinknots.org and you download it. Please check the signatures. I didn't do that here. Slap wrist for that, but please, if you're downloading binaries on the internet, just Google it or ask ChatGPT or Grok or anything. Just be like, I just downloaded a Bitcoin node. On Windows, how do I use GPG to verify that I didn't get man in the middle? And it's going to tell you how to.
On Core 30, is there an option to purposely cut the file size down to 42?
Yeah, on Core 30, you can manually set data carrier size back to 83 if you want. It's not going to work the way it used to because data carrier size, the way it works now is different. I don't understand exactly how they broke it, but it doesn't do what it used to do. You can also just set, rather than data carrier size equals 83, you can just set data carrier equals 0, and that just turns off op return completely. So that's fine. But at this point, it's all symbolic. Like the fact that 80% of the nodes have rolled out the red carpet for scammers and arbitrary data voids, it's a social layer attack. It's not a technical attack. So like we can counter it those ways, but I wouldn't, at this point, Knots is its own movement, right? It's like, you can run Knots if you want and set data carrier size to 100,000 if you want. You can do that. It's just more about the principle of the thing now. Just take responsibility for what's in your mempool, because if it's full of horrible stuff, that's on you. It's not on anyone else. You don't get to blame other people for it. Like just being intentional about it is what I appreciate people doing. Like if you really do want to relay arbitrary data around the Bitcoin network and you think it's censorship if you don't, that is, if you make that decision, I respect it. But Core, the approach Core are taking is actually to start removing the configurability. So like what you just asked, can I still change the size of data carrier size? Yes, but it's marked as deprecated, which means it's open season on that feature. And in Core 31, it will probably just be removed in some other pull request. And that, because they're saying, we don't want users to be able to control this stuff anymore. We just want you to be a free, dumb relay of anything people send through your house so that it can make it from some scammer to a miner. We want you to help in that, and we don't want you to have any option to even say no. That's not sustainable. Bitcoin will die if people in charge of it, people in charge of decision-making of Core, think that's all right, because it's not. It's an abuse of the people holding the network together. So yeah, next question.
Can you speak to like, sorry.
Go ahead. I'll ask this guy first.
Yes, go ahead.
Can anyone figure out any kind of incentive for the Bitcoin Core developers to want to do this? So I can't, it doesn't make any sense why they would want to do this. Who benefits?
That's a very good point.
The question is, what's the incentive for Bitcoin Core to destroy everyone's life savings? I don't know why they're doing it, and it's just psychologizing if I talk about it. Like, I'll straight up just be guessing. My favorite theory is like, I always deliberately go the opposite end of the spectrum from like the CIA infiltrated them and Mossad is like doing. I always go to the exact opposite end, which is like they're just a bit naive. Like the old guard of Core, which was like Greg Maxwell and Sipper and Vladimir and Jonas Schnelly. Two of them are gone now. One of them is sort of out of the picture. Only really Sipper is there. And they've been replaced by like much younger, more naive people that only look at things technically and don't understand like the more social implications of what they do. And they've kind of groupthink their way into thinking it's a good idea. But the pull request itself initially to do this was by Peter Todd. And Peter Todd is like a very strong advocate of miners earning as much money as possible from any means possible. Because he has this fear that we have the halving every 4 years, right? So every 4 years, miners get a 50% pay cut, which is sort of made up for by Bitcoin's price going up. But the theory is that transaction fees are meant to be what pays miners in the long term. and this is known as the security budget fund. Well, if you don't believe it, we call it FUD. And so to his mind, the more crap we can stuff in blocks, the more money miners can earn, and that's Bitcoin's security solved in the future. And nodes should relay as much of it as possible. And he also characterizes any node that refuses to play that game as censorship, which it definitely isn't. But he was the one that made the pull request. That one didn't work out. It turned into an absolute train wreck on GitHub. And then InstaGibbs opened another pull request after that did the same thing, but instead of killing data carrier size, it just deprecated it. And that one faced exactly as much controversy and hatred, and they kept just listing reasons for it. Like Gloria and Antoine wrote multiple rationalizations for it, just saying, look, this stuff ends up in the chain anyway, and all you're doing by not having it in your mempool is slowing down block propagation and messing up your fee estimation and centralizing mining, and these are the rationalizations for it. And it's, I can't speak to why they're doing it. I should know. Most of the people that I like rally this whole war with are like casting really horrible aspersions at this point. Like they're infiltrated, they're being paid to attack Bitcoin, yada yada. I have no idea why they're doing it. It's completely illogical to me.
But it's part of it. Like it's part of their reasoning that if spammers are going to spam the Bitcoin network, that if they do it in off return, you can prune that out. Prune that is sort of a less harmful way to do it than other ways.
Yeah.
And then, can you speak on it?
So that's, yeah, I missed that. One of the rationalizations they gave is op return is not as bad as other ways of doing things. No, we fake public keys. And that's just completely true on paper, but it's just negligible. When you contrast that with what are you doing by bumping up to 100,000 bytes? What kind of signal are you sending? You're just saying, we're rolling out the red carpet, spammers are welcome, we will move things around for you very quickly, we will face a lot of scrutiny over doing it, and we don't care about burning our own reputation. We will just make it as trivial as possible for you. And also they missed the contiguousness of op return data, which is like, this is where it gets a bit dark, and I'm like, do I really want to talk about this? But that's what I've been talking about for the last few days, and everyone's been like really upset about it, because the ways of storing arbitrary data in Bitcoin before require hacking your data in. If you want to store like a JPEG in Bitcoin, you have to hack it in using these various, because it's not a Bitcoin transaction. It needs to be stuffed in various chunks in a way that can be deciphered by them later, but the nodes are like, what is this? It looks like a Taproot transaction, but it doesn't make any sense. You can treat that as a valid transaction if you want, but it's also the person and the network as a whole are saying, we didn't endorse this. This is not what Bitcoin's for. There's just these weirdos doing stuff we don't understand. Op return is like, here, store a video in the blockchain. That's one chunk of data. And the fact that we endorse that means when it's full of garbage and illicit material and objectionable media, we no longer have any plausible deniability and saying, oh, a bunch of scammers are piggybacking Bitcoin and leeching off the network and we don't endorse it. Instead, people just say, hey, why are you allowing this stuff? Why are all your nodes relaying it? Why is it ending up in the chain without any resistance? You guys must be in favor of it. And we don't have any defense anymore. Like, I'm very good with saying all Bitcoin transactions are created equal, and I will relay any Bitcoin transaction. I'm not at all happy to say all data is equal, and no one here is. I would never store random files on my computer from people I don't know that don't want to deal with hosting it on their own server. So like, I'm just going to say it, if you're dealing with ransomware or malware or child pornography or any of this disgusting stuff, you have a problem with having a server somewhere because you're going to get shut down. So if you can trick the Bitcoin network into hosting your content for you on a network that everyone is defending, that they think I have the right to do this, if you can get it in the blockchain, then that solves your problem. If you want to trick someone into running your malware and they can grab the malware, not from a server you're trying to run somewhere it's impossible to stand up because everyone, like, if you want to run Azure or AWS or DigitalOcean and can disconnect your identity from it, it's really difficult to do. So for bad actors that want to scam people or put nasty, JPEGs those people, the server problem is real. If you can store it in the blockchain in contiguous chunks of data, way easier. you just get some old grandma somewhere to type in one line command that makes whatever it is they're typing the command into look like a Bitcoin node for a sec, reach out to a bunch of peers and download this block and grab that chunk of data from it. And that's a bunch of, malware or something like that that now gets executed on their machine. And it's not hosted on your server anymore as the scammer, it's hosted in the Bitcoin network. So you just dealt with that whole problem. And that's why it's like, are we gonna address that? Because they're not talking about the implications of stuff like that happening. They're just saying, oh, they can do it anyway. Like, well, how? How are they doing it now? Because they have to store it in all these non-contiguous chunks, which requires additional processing and gives us plausible deniability, saying we don't endorse this. So Bitcoin has enough reputational issues as it is anyway. We use too much energy, terrorists financing, all this crap that they've been throwing at us forever. The last thing I want is, oh yeah, it's also a database full of pornography. And it's just, I don't want to deal with it. It's impossible enough as it is. Next question.
Has anyone looked into fixing the problem with witness data in some groups that don't allow this?
Yeah, well, NODS filters out inscriptions. So the minute any protocol of spamming Bitcoin and getting arbitrary data into it reaches some sort of threshold where enough people are doing it, then it becomes trivial to filter it, because you just look at how they look at their mechanism for inscribing it into the blockchain and you go, all right, I know the footprint of those kinds of transactions now. So very quickly after inscriptions came out, Luke codes up, a mempool policy that will reject it. Or at least turned it into, he upgraded data carrier size to make it look for those kinds of things. And now they just are limited to 42 bytes, just like everything else. So it's like, if you want to use op return or the inscriptions hack, you're limited to the same amount by this same variable. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, a Bitcoin improvement proposal to do what exactly? To shrink the size of op return?
To not allow the pass-through fictitious witness data to go in.
I mean, it was not a Bitcoin improvement proposal. It was just a pull request into core. And that said, filter inscriptions, or make inscriptions subject to data carrier size. That was all it was. A bunch of people that are doing inscriptions came on and told us that was censorship, and then the pull request got closed as controversial. And that was the end of that in core. And we were like, okay, so you don't merge controversial PRs, I can understand that. And then they wanted to blow up op return by 1000x, and we said, we're not in favor of that. And they just kicked us all off GitHub and said, go away, you're an idiot. And that was similarly controversial, but they had no problem doing that. So but I don't know. It's not a Bitcoin improvement proposal kind of thing. It's just it should be a non-issue. It should have been, yeah, people running servers in their house want some basic protections about what content gets uploaded to them. Here are the tools you need to do it. So if core are going to start removing them, it just becomes reckless for people to run it. That's all there is. But I think we should wrap it up here so we get to socialize a bit. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah.